Come on along and listen to the lullaby of Broadway, the hip-hooray and ballyhoo, the lullaby of Broadway, the rumble of the subway train, the rattle of the taxi, the daffodils who entertain, the Angelos and Maxie's where Broadway baby.
Welcome to the American Theatre Wing Seminars on Working in the Theatre. These seminars are taking place at the City University, the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. They are brought to you under the year-round program of the American Theatre Wing. Perhaps the wing is best known for its annual Tony Awards, which were created to reward the achievement of excellence in the theatre. However, the wing works all year round so that people in the theatre and students of the theatre can one day achieve that award. It isn't for the best, it is for achieving the best that you possibly can do and learn in your profession. For those who have been here before, you know that the wing is most informative. The people in the theatre are simply wonderful. They share their knowledge, they give their time in order to create an atmosphere of learning for everybody. I hope that in this process of learning that they too, among themselves, learn a little bit more about the process of the theater and also about the wing. Our seminar today is on the Playscript, and once more we have brought to you the very best talent, the most experienced people in their profession that we can for you. I would like to turn this over to Jean Dalrymple, who is co-moderating with Henry Hughes. Jean is a member of the board of the American Theatre Wing and has done just about everything in the theatre, from producing and playwriting and authoring and directing. And there are probably many other things that she's done that I can't say right now. However, Henry Hughes, also a member of the board, and critic and director and playwright. And I will turn it over immediately to Henry and Jean so that we can get on with the nitty-gritty bit of the theater, the very important part of the theater, the word. Henry, Jean. Oh, I should tell you that I'm Isabel Stevenson, and I am president of the American Theatre Wing. And welcome again for being here. Thank
you. Isabel, how nitty-gritty do you want us to get? I'll just introduce the people on the panel quickly with the names of their most recently produced play. On my far right is Charles Fuller, and his play was done at the Negro Ensemble Company, and it was called Zooman and the Song. Next to Charles is Joanna Glass, whose play To Grandmother's House We Go, starring Eva Le Gallienne, was done on Broadway this season. Next to me, and between me and Miss Glass, is Vincent Canby, whose bill of 3 one-act plays called After All were done at the Manhattan Theatre Club. Next to me is Jean Dalrymple, whose most recent play, The Quiet Room, was done in Australia. Next to Jean is Peter Shaffer, whose most recent play, Amadeus, is currently packing them in on Broadway. Next to Peter is Susan Nanus, whose play The Survivor was done on Broadway, but the title was not prophetic. The next to Susan is David Rimmer, whose play Album is a current off-Broadway success. And finally, at the end is Lucy Kroll, who is both a literary agent whose clients number Joanna Glass, and also an agent for many actors and directors. think we might start discussion today with something that I'm sure interests all of you who have written plays, and that is when you have finished your script, or think you've finished it, how do you go about getting it produced? Now, there's a great variety of routes, and I think we have a nice assortment here today. So I think we perhaps could start with Charles Fuller and ask him how his play, how he happened to get his play put on at the Negro Ensemble Company, and if that was the only alternative, and if it's a process that other playwrights like himself can easily follow, or do they have to sort of join the club before their plays are considered?
Well, there is a club of sorts. When I finish a play, I'm rather fortunate in being able to take the play directly to the theater. In the case of Zooman and the Sign, the Negro Ensemble Company. Douglas Turner Ward and I have had a relationship since about 1974, and I've done, this will be my third play. Zooman and the Sign was done there, the third play. And in that way, I've been very fortunate in being able to simply finish the play and take it directly to a producer. When I began, it was another thing, and that was about 12 years ago, and then there weren't any producers. And it was quite hard. Black theater in which was directed at black people for the most part, simply didn't have that many producers. And Douglas came along, and Woody King came along, and they offered us at least stages in which to do our work.
Woody King's organization was called the Henry Street
Settlement. Yeah, sure. And I worked there. The first two plays I did in New York, I did there, and then the next three I did with the Negro Ensemble Company. I haven't had a whole hell of a lot of dealings with producers outside of Douglas Turner Ward and Woody King. I, quite frankly, don't know what the difficulty would be outside of those two producers. I've been fortunate enough to have both of them do my work whenever it's done.
Well, certainly. Once you got into how did you get them to initially recognize you as a talent they wanted to produce?
Well, Woody was, in the first play I did in New York, we started out at McCarter Theater.
In Princeton?
Yeah, in Princeton. They were looking for a new play to do in 1968. And Arthur Lithgow came along and asked the group I was running if we could produce a play for the McCarter Theater. And I wrote the play, and that's how it started.
And he came down, he was in it? Or?
Arthur came down.
No, I mean Woody King.
Yeah, when we came to New York, we opened at the gate on 2nd Avenue, and Woody was in the cast. And after that, he and I got to be friends, and he then took over the producing role at Henry Street. And when I finished my next work, I called on him to produce it, and he was, nice enough to do that. So,
that's great. I always think that it's important that there be as little time between the time you finish the last page of your play and the time that the curtain goes up opening night, because it's one of the terrible things is that many playwrights write a play and then it sits around for 2 or 3 years, and by the time that it gets produced, it's almost not your play anymore. It's something that you...
Well, I'm always broke, so as soon as mine get done, they really have to be done. I really can't wait too long.
Joanna, you started out in Canada, but you became an American citizen, and your first plays, I believe, started in the regional theater before they came to New York. Can you tell us how you happened to pick that route, or they...
Yes, well, I was not a playwright in Canada. It's only been the last 10 years, and I have been living in the United States for 20 years. The way that I began, I suppose my situation is a little bit similar now, in that after 10 years, luckily there are a few people that ask to see my stuff. But 10 years ago there was nobody, and most of what I was writing at that time, what I was really vitally interested in, was out of my background, my Canadian background. And that was a bit of a problem in New York. I think commercially there's a sort of an overall, it's a big generalization, but a certain dullness about things Canadian.
The famous line of Noel Coward's, where are you going? Canada.
Oh, no. Or Gertrude Stein's, there is no there to its where, or nowhere to its there. Anyway, I decided after trying a couple of Canadian things that didn't get any reaction from anybody to write a play about an Italian family in New Haven. My ex-husband had been in graduate school for a very long time at Yale. And I was supporting him at that time and putting him through. And I worked at the Winchester Western Arms Manufacturing Corporation at the time, and felt that I had this immediate insight into this town and gown kind of clash. So I wrote a play called Sant'Acqua, and luckily a good friend of mine, Austin Pendleton, was starting to try and direct at Herbert Berghoff down in the Village. So that's the first play that was done there. Then two one-acts, Canadian Gothic and American Modern, were done 2 years later at Manhattan Theatre Club, done actually twice there, in the fall and then in the spring.
Were these workshop or readings, or were they full productions?
They were full productions, but that was, I believe, the year that Manhattan Theatre Club began. So though I say they were full productions, they were not like today's full productions. People provided their own costumes and sets and scenery and props and so on. It was a very shoestring operation at that point. And those two plays, Canadian Gothic and American Modern, have been done a lot regionally, and a great deal in Canada, and have been published and done on radio and television and so on. And then about 2 years after that, a play called Artichoke was done at Long Wharf. And then
It was Colleen
Dewhurst,
Dewhurst.
yes, was in it. And that also, luckily, has been, I'm always broke too, so I really rely on these regional theaters to keep me going. Then the Canadian government commissioned a play that was done at Manitoba Theatre Centre in Winnipeg, a play that was called at that time The Last Chalice, and we did it up there, and it is the play that I now am hoping to go back and do a big rewrite on.
Do you like the commissioning process? I mean, do you find that it makes you lazy or makes you work hard? Or?
Well, it's only happened to me once, and it happened within such a political context that it was a little bit unpleasant for me, because the Canadians, as probably a lot of you know, have been going through a very, very nationalistic time the last 20 years, trying to keep Canadians at home and working there. And I guess it was 3 years after I married an American, I changed my citizenship. But people still call me a Canadian playwright, and it makes for all kinds of difficulties with grants and such, because I'm not any longer, and yet I seem to be known as a Canadian playwright. At any rate, to tie this up quickly here, there was the Last Chalice in Winnipeg, and then this year, Grandmother's House on Broadway. So this is the first Broadway
Grandmother's House
experience.
came to Broadway by Houston, is it?
Yes, but we cast in New York and took it to Houston, played 6 weeks. And
That was less expensive than doing it right on Broadway, I suppose.
I'm not really sure what all the reasons were. The original director, Alan Schneider, who did not finally direct it, had close friends and connections in Houston, and my play Artichoke had been done there, and they had asked me for a new play, so it just seemed a good place to go to begin it.
Was Grandmother's House an autobiographical play at all?
No, no.
Did some family you knew?
Oh,
it seems so
you
real.
know, these things are always a collage of some of it was, but no, I wouldn't say really, no.
Vincent, you have this special problem of being a famous movie critic, so that in a certain sense this was a you had a foot in the door anywhere you wanted to go. On the other hand, there were people who said, what is a critic doing trying to write a play? And so, which is a negative. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit how you resolved this problem, if it was a problem, and how you happened to how you got your first couple of plays done.
Well, if I had a foot in the door, it was the wrong door. I think I came to playwriting sort of by a long route, which was first as a newspaper man, which I've been for over 20 years. And then I wrote a couple of novels, which I had great fun doing, but found that no matter what I wrote or how good or bad it was, everybody looked at it in terms of the work of a film critic. Apparently, they thought, trying to sell a film script. And I've never had really any interest in writing for films. I think I see too many of them. And I also am too aware that there are thousands and thousands of scripts that are written that never get made. And when you write a novel, if it's halfway good, you stand a great chance of it's being published. And I was lucky in working at Knopf, having a contract there, working with, I think, the best editor in the business, Bob Gottlieb. And I decided I had something that had been in the back of my mind for some time that would work only as a play. And having been sort of burned by book reviewers saying, oh, here's another novel by the film critic, I decided to try a play, which I did, and I showed it to Gottlieb, who has nothing to do with the theater. He introduced me to a very good agent named Flora Roberts. Flora sent it to, she said, this has no place on Broadway, but there are lots of off-Broadway places where you might like to work. And I've been very lucky because each initial contact I've had has been like finding the right analyst. My first two plays were done at the Ensemble Studio Theater.
Kurt Dempster.
Kurt Dempster is the head of it. And they were really very happy experiences because everything was done modestly, low-key. And the second one, which I liked very much, but opened, thank God, during the newspaper strike. So, Walter Kerr, who was scabbing, came and did a review of it for WQXR, which was I've never read and I never planned to.
You don't know what he said in this review?
Oh, I know he hated it.
Oh.
I have no interest in finding out just why. And then these 3 one-acts went to the Manhattan Theater Club, which the run has just concluded, and they were done under something called an In the Works series, which is a little bit like being shot out of a cannon, because with 3 weeks of rehearsal and 2 weeks of playing, and they're presented to the subscribers of the Manhattan Theater Club as plays that are in the works, which immediately, I think, invites the audience that comes in to look at them to be skeptical.
Like unbaked bread or something.
Yes, they think, well, if they're in the works, they can't be any good, so they question everything. And yet the auspices, or the physical circumstances under which these 3 one-acts were done were quite marvelous. I mean, they were full productions. Everything was inexpensive, but they were full productions. Some terrifically talented people worked on sets, costumes, and whatnot. They're doing 4 full-length or full and separate productions on a unit set that was beautiful, is beautiful. And though I thought that the plays were totally finished, when we went into rehearsal, I realized only about the time of in the 5th week, just how much I still wanted to do, and of course then it's all over.
Mr. Canby, may I interrupt you just for a minute? Henry and Jean, this is not a commercial, but I'd like to have 1 second of your time. We have a very special guest here, and I'd like to introduce him. I'd like to also tell you, in introducing him, that although the American Theatre Wing services all of New York through its hospital and school programs, such as bringing Ain't Misbehavin' to the Harlem Hospital in New York, our Saturday Theatre for Children program, in Brooklyn and the Bronx. The theater is the focus and focal point of New York City. It is most important, and I have the great honor and pleasure of introducing the Honorable Edward Koch, Mayor of New York City, who perhaps more than anyone else is New York.
That's very nice and very generous of you. I'm delighted to be here for a number of reasons. One, to be in the presence of many of the great playwrights of the world and have them in New York City, and having them addressing those who are interested in the theater, which is what the American Theater Wing continues to do by gathering such a distinguished group of playwrights and panelists to share their insights with others who have the same desires to write and to be involved in the theater. So that's number one. The second is that politics is theater. It's timing. And it is an ability to interact with other people and to get your message across. And so there's no question in my mind that it is theater in the very best sense of the word. Also on occasion is street theater, in which some of us are compelled to be involved with against our own desires, but that's also part of politics, and I enjoy every minute of it. I also am indebted to the theater because once a year, in a truly professional, albeit amateur sense, I am actually on the stage before the inner circle, a group of reporters who require that the mayor make an ass of himself by getting on stage and singing and dancing. And my excuse always, as it relates to that, is when someone says, "But gee, you can't dance, and isn't it, just surprising you're up there?" And I said, "Well, I'm sort of like a dancing bear. The miracle is that the bear can dance at all." And that is my excuse. But the theater itself, the playwrights, the producers, the actors, the performers have always been very generous to mayors and have permitted mayors to use their talents to make the mayors look good. And 42nd Street was the production this year that allowed me to look good on stage. And so when I was asked if I might come by, I accepted with alacrity, and I wish you all well. You are a great cultural resource for the country. In addition to that, you bring in revenue, and I thank you.
Mr. Mayor, we've had musicals like Fiorello and so on. When we get around to writing a musical about you, what should the title be?
How am I doing?
Isn't that wonderful? And now we'll continue. I'm sorry to interrupt it, but I'm so honored at having the mayor come by here that I thought you would be too. Now will you continue? And forgive me, Mr. Canby, for interrupting.
Well, I don't think I'll ever again be interrupted by
Vincent, you bring up a point that and I'm sure that other people would like to talk about it too, but there's something very important, which is that when you do a workshop production or a production that only runs 2 or 3 weeks, And sometimes, and Peter can say something about this, even one that runs for 2 or 3 years, you feel there is something that you would like to do to this script, but somehow all the forces of theater mitigate against you being able to work on it some more. The actors have other things to do, the play is closed, you have other responsibilities and so on. And I always think it's too bad because as a critic, you always see things that, you see places where plays could be improved and they never are. And
well, the great thing about a place like the Manhattan Theater Club is that there is a chance that you will go on and have the opportunity to keep working on it. And
will you change these plays and go back there again with them?
I hope so, yes. And the thing about the difference between a novel and a play, you can put the novel aside, nobody's particularly waiting for it. I've never written on commission in my life, and I really don't think I could. I mean, I write something and put it aside, and then I generally know whether it's good or bad later. With the plays, you can put them aside, but you truly don't know what's going on until you get into a couple, say, the second or third week of rehearsal. And then when you begin to bore yourself, you know you're boring a lot of other people first.
I should mention that the play, after all, is 3 one-act plays, but each one of these one-act plays is almost the blueprint for a 3-act play. And so I think that you really have three-act plays there, and you ought to pick one of them and make it into a 3-act play.
But my idea, I think the really good one-act play gives you that impression. It's so compressed that you come out wanting more. I think any one of those 3, if expanded to a full-length play, would not be the same thing at all.
Might be better.
You're right.
Anyway, Peter, you never have this problem of plays closing in 3 weeks, do you? You always have.
There's always a first time.
But perhaps you could say a little bit. Amadeus is everybody knows about, but perhaps you could say a little bit about how you first got started when you were. I remember seeing you in London back about 15, 20 years ago, and you were an inveterate theater goer. You were always going to see obscure plays in obscure places, and I wondered if that was
Well, I was always very infatuated with the theatre when I was a very, very young lad. It's a very good question, this, because it must seem from the other way around, when you were trying to get started in the theatre and to have your plays produced, it must seem impossible to get in. Like it must appear like an enormous citadel of people who are lucky enough to be inside. And how do you, when you're starting, get in? It always seemed so to me. I thought, well, how does one get started? This, I think, still obtains, despite the fact that today there are a great many more, oddly enough, producing agencies of one kind or another, a great deal more theatre than there was when I was young, actually. But I think the problem still remains, because one still, I think most authors are timid. They have a kind of fear that they will be found inadequate and their plays unproducible. And, of course, the only way to find out if a play is producible is to produce it, is to do it. I've actually had 2 careers, or whatever you call it, two goes at the theatre, and one what I would call the commercial theatre, and one the uncommercial theatre. All my plays have started in England. When I was younger, and when I say younger, because I wasn't that young when I had my first play produced, my first play was called Five Finger Exercise, and I was 32 when it was done. That was in 1958. And that was done for the commercial theatre, or rather by the commercial theatre, by a producing organisation called H.M. Tennant in London. They were a very grand firm. They were the biggest, I think, producing agency in London at that time. And it was a completely casual way one got into it. I wrote a play called Five Finger Exercise. It was actually called something else in those days. And I gave it to a friend who knew a girl who was a script reader or something of Tennant's. he handed it to this girl, who in the process of time gave it to one of the directors of this theatre. This took about 6 months, by which time I had forgotten giving the play at the beginning to the young man who gave it to the young girl. One day I received a call from a man I'd never heard of called John Perry, who was in fact the director of H.M. Tennant. And I went to see him, and he sat down and he said, "You've got to have a maid." He was a very eccentric Anglo-Irishman. He's still alive. And I said, "Well, I can't afford one." It was a very surrealist conversation, and he said, "Don't be silly." Very sort of cantankerous Anglo-Irishman. "I'm talking about your play. There's this woman, she's got a family, they live in the country, she's very grand. What's she going to do? Is she going to cook everything herself? She hasn't got time." And I said, "Well, it's a tight family play, it doesn't need a maid. What would the maid do?" "Cook." It's a curiously H.M. Tennant remark, actually. It was in the days when you had one set and tight number of characters and chintz sofas and cocktails on the, bottles of drinks on and off-stage pianos, and maids appeared. They answered also what he should have said, is answer the telephone and explain the plot. And I said, "Does this mean you're going to do it?" He said, "Of course we're going to do it, or well, you wouldn't be here, would you? Are you always like this?" "What do you say to John Gielgud?" And I said, "Well, for what part?" "Not for a part. There isn't a part he could play, and if you think he could play the 16-year-old boy, I mean for directing it, of course." "Really? Are you always like this?" It was a very, very odd afternoon, and it went on like this. But, I mean, I came out walking on air thinking they're going to do my play, and they did it, and did it very well, and John directed it very well, and it was a success. So that I suppose I was a victim, or an enjoyer, if you like, of that process called an overnight success, which is rather marvellous, because I was so naive in that day that I rang up to thank Mr. Perry for a cheque for £200, which I thought was it. Yeah. I thought that was what I got, which was very nice, considering I didn't have one agent.
You hadn't had an agent at this time?
No, I had no agent. And that may not be true. I think I did have an agent, but anyway, I didn't understand or read, and still don't understand any contact that's ever been made for me. And he said, "Well, yes, it's very nice of you to thank me." And I said, "Well, it's been nice." He said, "You seem to think that it's been nice knowing you. Is this the subject of the conversation? Are you saying goodbye?" I said, "There will be another cheque next week, you know." And I said, "Will there?" He said, "Are you really trying to do this? I don't understand the conversation." And to this day, he thinks I'm the village idiot, I think. But anyway, that's how I got into it. And I did I did another play for them. I did a double bill called The Privateer and The Public Eye for them. And then, a very interesting thing happened. The National Theatre was founded in Great Britain. And in a way, I'd always been moving in my mind from naturalistic theatre, which really, I suppose, secretly didn't much interest me. I suppose it... No, that's not true. It kind of interested me, and I think every playwright begins one play, his first probably, as an autobiographical exercise. It's what he knows immediately. I think most young playwrights actually write their first play in order to be pitied in public. I think they really do. They sympathize with me, like me, tell me how awful my parents were, how dreadfully unhappy I was, how wounded I was by my first love affair, and I was right. I'm sure there's an element of that in a lot of plays. Later on, I mean, since you cannot go on unless you're very foolish, rewriting your own autobiography, or even indeed looking in your own autobiography for sources of public, being aggrieved in public, I think you begin to move outside your own skull and outside your own particular worries into something more general, more important in the universal sense. I always wanted to do gestural theatre, what subsequently came to be known as, I suppose, total theatre. And when the National was founded, I had written a script called The Royal Hunt of the Sun, and it was a play about the fall of the Inca Empire, the conquest of the Inca Empire by the Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century. And it was clearly not the sort of play that would be done on Shaftesbury Avenue or on, indeed, Broadway in those days. The National Theatre seemed to be the perfect place for it. And it was sent there, and they accepted it after a lot of muddle, but they did, and they did it very beautifully. basically John Dexter directed it, and it was just the kind of play I think that they were looking for in order to establish what a national theatre was about, which is a play that couldn't really be handled without some immense financial risk by a private management. There were, after all, 35 or so in the cast, you know, and it's not a musical. It was very, although it had a lot of music. So I really began a second career. I really drifted away at that point from the commercial theatre, which anyway was getting turned over in England more and more to Japanese tourists. And, you know, I mean, don't believe, everybody tells you now that you should go to England to enjoy the fruits of a marvelous, thriving commercial theatre. It's not true. The great theatre in England, I think, is the subsidized theatre now. And Broadway as a theatre, to me, is far commercial theatre is far finer than in London, because I think in London they just play the tourist trade now. In the meantime, I then proceeded to write 4 plays for the National. I was very happy there. I wrote Black Comedy there for them. I did Equus for them, and then Amadeus. And I've always had a kind of, I don't say I'm attached to them in a formal sense, but they're my first thought when I go to them. And that, you see, was another relationship altogether.
Is there a different kind of pressure on you when you take a play to Peter Hall?
I think so.
Than there is to...
Ultimately, it's the same pressure, because you want to make it good. Your job as a playwright, I think, is to hold an audience for 2 hours with the theme you have selected. The freedom you get at a place like the National, you pay for in royalties, of course, because I mean, you only get 1 performance a week or something like that. But what you buy with that diminution of royalties is, say, an 8-week rehearsal period, the freedom to experiment within a situation where, for example, I work a lot with masks. I did with Royal Hunt, I did with Equus, I do slightly with Amadeus. I mean, I'd like to do much more. Next door is a workshop. If you don't like that much, you go back at the end of the day and try another one and get a designer to do that, or you go to the acoustical room and try a new sound. You can't do that in the commercial theatre. You have to, if you want a new mask, you have to cross the river to some strange place in New Jersey that makes masks. It all costs a fortune. And it's all very difficult, you know. So it's a question, for me it has always been, what do I want? Do I want money or do I want the art? Hopefully both, but basically it's the art that comes with me first, you know. That's why I moved to the National. And of course I was lucky enough to, most of the plays I did were enjoyed by American audiences on Broadway, and now I live here, you see, I mean, because I very much like New York. But I did them there first.
When are you going to write a failure?
Oh, I did write a failure. I read a play called The Battle of Shrivings, which was done with John Gielgud.
Good.
So it's done. It's done. I hope you're the only one.
Do you want to talk a little bit about how the Survivor came into being?
Yes. First of all, before I do, I just think it's interesting that no playwright here has yet spoken about sort of the great help in detail of the off-Broadway theater community that's available in New York, because I myself came to New York 7 years ago with scripts and did have to go peddling from theater to theater, and I found a great deal of support and acceptance from several theaters in New York, the Manhattan Theater Club being one, the Women's Inter-Art Theater being another, the Ensemble Studio Theater being another, and the St. Clements Theater being another, where the Survivor originated as a workshop. Now, the Survivor is sort of a special project because it's based on a man's life, a man who survived the Holocaust and who was a young boy in the Warsaw Ghetto and fought there in the uprising when he was 15 years old, and then was captured, and he spent the rest of the war in concentration camps. And I spent 3 years writing this play, and the way it originated was a friend of mine who was a director who had directed other plays of mine, also the Henry Street Settlement House. I had 2 plays done there. Her parents were survivors, and I went to her home, and her mother, for some reason, started telling me stories about her experiences. And I think, like most people who think about the Holocaust, until recently, if you think about it at all, you think about just that a lot of people died. You don't really think about the fact there's the survivors, and that they walk around carrying all this incredible, these stories that most people shy away from, that don't want to hear. And I said, I'm going to write a play about this. I don't know what. I want to write a play about the Holocaust, which is my way of writing. I know some writers choose a character or a situation. I usually choose an idea or a theme. One of my other plays is about teenage pregnancy called Playing Dolls. And I said, I want to write a play about teenage pregnancy. And then I started looking into how I was going to write it. Well, this was the same thing about the Holocaust. And I was walking around, people were saying, what's your next play? I said, oh, it's going to be about the Holocaust. People were rolling their eyes and saying, you know, the Holocaust. And that was before anything was on television or any of that. And I had a boyfriend at the time who called me up one day and said, come over to this house. I'm with my father, and these friends of his are survivors. And I went over and I met these very lovely people who had been in the Warsaw Ghetto. And I talked to them in detail. And this man said to me, you know, I've never told my story to an American before in my life. Only my family. There's something about you. That's it. You really want to know. I said, I really do. I want to write a play, but I need some kind of help. And he said, well, if I know of anything, I was looking for some financial support or something like this, I'll let you know. And I thought, well, that's the end of that. 5 months later, I had 2 other plays produced. One was at the Inter-Art Theater called Where Memories Are Magic and Dreams Invented, about an old lady, sensuality, totally different subject. This man calls up and he says, a man named Jack Eisner is going to call you. He's looking for a playwright. Jack Eisner is this man who has a book out also called The Survivor. At that time, he was just writing his book. He said, I want to tell my story, and I'm going to commission you to write this play for me, which is a whole other thing, because now, you know, it's not only a commission, but you're writing about somebody whose life it is, who's alive, who's saying, no, it wasn't like that, and it wasn't like that, and it was very difficult. And what was so unique that I felt about this story was that this took place with children who became smugglers to smuggle food go out of the ghetto, which was a corner of Warsaw, and it was blocked off by a 9-foot brick wall with barbed wire and glass and armed guards every 100 feet with machine guns. And little 12-year-old kids would find holes in the wall or find ways to sneak out, go over to the Christian side of Warsaw, buy up a lot of food, stuff their clothes with it, and smuggle themselves back into the ghetto because everybody was starving there because they weren't allowing any food in. And this boy had formed a gang and had a gang, and they were feeding their family, and ultimately when things got so bad they became rebels, part of the Warsaw Revolution, and fought in the uprising. It took me a year to think of exactly how I wanted to say this. I did a lot of research. I went to Warsaw. I went to Auschwitz. I went to Treblinka. I went to Jerusalem, to the Yad Vashem Memorial. I interviewed survivors for a very long time. And I finally sort of felt like I could understand this play the way I wanted to write it. And I sort of, unfortunately, critics did not agree with the way I went about writing it. I felt that you couldn't tell this as an intimate little story. I wanted to hit subjects all over, sort of give you a collage of the ghetto life. And I had a lot of stories going on at once. This boy's girlfriend was posing as a Christian on the Aryan or Christian side of Warsaw as a maid, a girl, just, you know, as a housemaid. And he found her there on the street accidentally. And he used to smuggle over there so they could conduct a love affair. They were 15 years old, risking their lives for love. I mean, it was amazing to me how in the face of all this stress and daily death, people just wanted to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, tell a joke, sing a song, you know, live a normal life, normalcy. So I finally wrote this play, and I had a reading. I had 3 readings first, with extensive rewrites. And then Craig Anderson, who is a producer and director in New York, decided he wanted to produce it and direct it. And we did a workshop of it at St. Clement's Theater last June, where I rewrote every 3 days. Every 3 days I said, oh, this is wrong, this is wrong. I mean, I had so much material, in a way you almost get blind because you can tell this story and that story. And I made a conscious decision to have no deaths, no real violence, no Germans on the stage, no real guns on the stage. When people died, they hit a spotlight and then they narrated what they felt like right before they died. I didn't want to have any of that cliched German Nazi kind of stuff on stage, which I think is a movie anyway, and which doesn't work very well. I wanted to do it just from inside, and I did my research only up to the end of the ghetto. In other words, I wanted to be like a person who lived in Warsaw, who didn't know what was going on outside. They didn't know about the concentration camps, and so I tried to create my characters oblivious to this. And then finally, we decided to move it to Broadway. I did a lot more rewrites, and we cast it last fall. It took a long time to cast it because the leads were children, 7 children. and it was produced in February.
Did you have an agent? How did you get it produced? What was it?
I did have an agent. I have an agent. His name is George Lane at the William Morris Agency. But I had an agent before him, and he sort of took me on in the middle of this project, which is a very difficult project, and it took up all my time. And I was very committed to it on an emotional level, you know, because I became a survivor almost myself through all this incredible research. And he did help me look for a director and ultimately help get it produced. But I must say that the way I got it to St. Clements was that I went with somebody to another show, and we went out for drinks with the guy who runs St. Clements, and I was sitting next to him. I'd never met him before, and I said, "Do you have any space in your theater in the spring?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I have a play. You want to do it?" And that's what happened.
Oh, that's wonderful. Henry?
You seem to feel that now that perhaps the collage system couldn't be made to work, or you feel that the subject matter perhaps destroyed the chance of the play to have a long run?
Well, you know, I don't necessarily agree with what a lot of people felt about the play. The critics, the play has a lot of jokes. The play has a lot of humor. A lot of the critics felt that this was very disrespectful to the Holocaust. I happen to know personally that the people who make the most jokes are the survivors. They lived through humor by mocking themselves, and that hundreds of survivors came to see this play and then came up to me and said, "That's exactly the way it was. That's what we did." So,
but the audience didn't really want jokes. They wanted some sort of somber treatment of it.
well, I don't know if the audience wanted that. The critics wanted that. The audience is, I mean, I'm not saying the play had, of course, problems, and you know, we could make different choices in terms of the way it was produced, but we had a lot of standing ovations. We had a lot of people throwing flowers on the stage. We had a lot of people crying, you know, and being very moved. And I, in fact, heard one man say, "I used to think that we should forget this already, but after seeing this play, I don't believe it anymore."
Does the play have a future, you think?
I think we're going to do it in Europe, and we might, yes, I think it does have a future. I think 3 years is too long to spend on something and just
Dave?
stop.
And
Dave, yes.
we better go on.
No, David,
Yes.
perhaps you'd like to say a little word about album, which we're talking. Peter was saying that most people's first play is autobiographical. This wasn't your first play, but it does seem to be somewhat autobiographical.
Well, I've certainly been accused of being autobiographical about it, but I feel it isn't particularly my story. It's just four sort of archetypal kids growing up during the 1960s, and I didn't really want to get anything that I felt or that was my, you know, like Peter was saying about the pitying myself and my failed love affairs and all that stuff. I figure that's you know, something for diaries or something like that, and I just wanted to create a piece of entertainment, and that's what I tried to do.
And how did you get it produced?
Well, it was originally it was through a director named Joan Silver, who mutual friends introduced us, and she read the script and really liked it, and she we shopped around for an off-Broadway workshop to do it in, and we eventually wound up at the WPA Theater, which was a very good experience working down there with the not so much commercial pressure and all that, and it went over quite well, and a commercial producer came down and picked it up and moved to off-Broadway from there. It took a long time to get to that place. It took about 5 years and about 5 or 6 different workshop productions along the way to really get there, but there you go.
Was it always called album?
No, it was called Ain't It Just Like the Night. It was called The White Album before the book, Joan Didion's book came out. And it was done in various places, at the Phoenix, at the Playwrights Horizons. And again, it was like Mr. Canby was saying about the process of learning while you're rehearsing it, and then finally it's over, you don't have a chance. Well, I guess that's just part of it. You just have to start rewriting it all over again, because that's what I did. Every time it was done, I just did a major rewrite on it, and it, you know, came time to do it again, another major rewrite, and finally I got it right after 5 years.
Lucy Kroll, what can the agent do to help the kind of the unestablished playwright? And the certainly you can't read 1,000 or 2,000 scripts from people you have never heard of. But what sort of policy have you found works for you as an agent and has helped some playwrights first of all in discovering them and then getting them their first productions?
Well, Henry, I'd rather talk about the state of the theater than my life as an agent.
Can we do both?
No, I'm being bold about it because I do think that in the last 20 years, the opportunity for the playwright, and I think the foundation of the theater is the writer, not the building, not the actor, not the artistic director, the writer, the playwright. And I think that that now has come into being. And your theaters throughout the country, the regional theaters, have given you people a life that was not true when I first started as an agent. And the doors are open. I think the theater communications are available to all of you, and I don't think that the Mecca is Broadway. I think that that's to be avoided if you can, unless it is an absolute quote-unquote commercial play. I don't know what a commercial play is now. But
You mean for somebody who's writing a first play?
I'm talking of that, yeah, the playwright. The young playwright. And I do think that that you should become associated with a home. I think a home is terribly necessary. Mentors, actors, directors, where you can flourish at that particular period of your development. I don't think an agent makes for success. I think an agent is a friend, a mentor. I think those of us who work have come from the theater. I was a performer. I understand the agony. I do understand the collective aspects of the theater, and the playwright then puts his body, his soul, into a group that then makes that baby whole. And I think a play has many lives. For example, I would hope that your play will have a life beyond it belongs in the literature, in the world literature. And that is true of Joanna's play. So that a success or failure on Broadway should not be your goal.
Lucy, how do you respond to a request from a playwright or a performer to come and see them in a workshop production if you don't know either the performer or the playwright?
Well, I'm just one person. I'm the last of the independent agents. I don't have a huge staff. It is only myself and my life energy. So I do have to be selective. I see as much as I can and read as much as I can. But it is I am limited by
and you try to. I think
I do cover all of the. I have had a hand in the development of all of the regional theaters because I think that goes back into our culture without being an agent.
Sure, but given
I should be a foundation. That's what
given
I'd like
that
to be.
situation, given that situation, what sort of a letter is? What should a person put in a letter they write to an agent asking them to come and see them that gives them some faint chance of grabbing one of your time slots?
I really can't address myself to that, Henry. I don't know.
Could you think about it? We're going to
Okay.
take a break, but could you think about if you had a large organization and you had large staff, how would you sift through the request to read the script? Or
I
where to
read
go?
almost everything that came through, but I think the one thing you can't do is to give a critique, because if you don't want to handle the play, you have no right to pass your critique on the basis of your handling it or not, because there is the talent must be protected.
So you just don't. You just say it's
I
not
never
for
give
me.
a critique if I don't.
When you turn the script down, you don't criticize.
I
You
write
just
as
say,
kind a
no.
letters as I can and
Right.
not give a critique. critique.
Well, we're going to stop now and back in a minute.
For 5 minutes, I ask that you do not leave the room.
We are continuing our series of seminars on working on the theater that the American Theatre Wing brings to you. This is part of our program of servicing the community through the theater. They are coming to you through the facilities of the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and we are indeed grateful to Bob Isaacs and his staff for making these possible. They are also to be seen on Channel B 4 times a week. Today's seminar is on the Playscript, that very important part of the theater, the word. And once more, Jean Dalrymple and Henry Hughes will continue their discussion with some of the most talented and most important and exciting playwrights of Broadway, off-Broadway, and off-Broadway. Jean, Henry, will you please continue? Thank you.
I think playwriters is a very good word, by the way. I think that playwright, you know, meaning that the play is wrought, is not quite what it should be. And it was George Bernard Shaw who called my attention to that. But he said, after all, I guess it's true, because we always rewrite, and I suppose that that is really writing, W-R-I-G-H-T-I-N-G.
Somehow you can't rewrite, can you?
No.
I think what we might try to do now is to ask any of the people on the panel if they don't have some small complaint about the present situation they face in the theater that they would like to voice. Everything now seems, in a way, everybody seems to have adapted rather nicely to the various degrees of success and failure, and I think that perhaps there is some anger to be found in the panel about the current state of the theater. I know Tennessee Williams. We had a meeting of the American Theater Critics Association, and Tennessee Williams was there, and I called on him last because I thought he would say something eloquent and wonderful. And he got up and he said, the money lenders are in the temple, and there is no one to drive them out. And he sat down. Now, I wonder if some of you don't have not that particular complaint necessarily, but some complaint about the conditions that face you as a playwright.
As we go on to the complaints, could we also have a brief how they came to playwriting, or what was their
We've
background?
been through that for the whole first hour.
Well, no, I know that, but I want to know, did they go to university? Did they go to writing schools? Did they come from Chicago? From where? From how?
I'm from Philadelphia, and whatever that means. And I came to playwriting quite by accident. I was writing short stories during the mid-'60s for Liberator magazine and several of the other rather revolutionary publications that were coming out during that time. And most of my short stories were mostly dialogue. And when I got an opportunity to experiment, really, with the play form, I decided that I would just take this short story dialogue and start playing with it as material for the stage. I went to college. I don't know what that means to my writing skills, really. I think more for me, being in the Army, going overseas, being involved in the Civil Rights Movement during the 60s, listening to jazz music, reading a great deal, was much more responsible for me as a writer than college was. Most of my professors told me that I should give it up that there was no place in the theater for a black playwright to begin with. And even if I found a place, it would be very tiny. I'm finding that the places are getting a little larger, but he was kind of right about the size. But that I would not really do well as a playwright because there hadn't been a sizable number of black playwrights in American literature anyway. So I decided that I would take some steps to change that. That if there wasn't a literature that somehow spoke to the needs of black people in this society, I would do something about that by at least making some attempt to give you what we were about in this culture. So I found that there were other writers like myself working here in New York, and we sort of got together. And we are in the process now of sort of creating a literature that never existed before, that was never here before. And we are trying now to leave, I suppose, what all playwrights try to leave, and that is something of a people in a specific time. What we are like in the 60s or 70s can be read in our plays or seen in our work. And we are the first group, really, in such sizable numbers that have ever done that. So I feel quite excited by that process.
Thank you.
Okay.
You can have your choice. You can either be angry or you can tell your tell your life story. Insofar as it relates to training to be a playwright. Or you can be angry at the fact that the training was no good.
Yeah. In our performance schedule, we
But you don't have to go.
It's divided half and half as far as acting concerned, was whether you saw a great deal or whether you learned while you were on the job what was the most important. And I thought it might be an interesting thing to have a rundown here too.
Well,
I think that I learned by going to the theater all my life from the time I was 6 years old. And finally, I was an actress, and I decided that I'd write a play with a good part for myself. and John Golden produced it, but he didn't give me the part. he gave it to Una Merkel, and she became a star. And he made me his assistant, and he taught me to be a producer. I often wonder what would have happened to my life if I'd played that part.
Does anyone else want to address either of these questions?
I'd like to pick up on what Peter said in terms of his career and the English theater and the American theater, or Shaftesbury Avenue and Broadway. That Peter's fuller life and larger development of his initial talent came with the help of the National Theatre. Not the help, but the support. And I do think for the young playwright, I'm addressing you, that your dream should not be Broadway or Shaftesbury Avenue, but a place where you can work and perfect what you want to do, and there are many places to do it. Off Broadway and throughout the country and the world, really. So that if you can set your goals that way, I think it'll be within your reach.
I think that's very important. We do have all kinds of workshops.
I never, that I'm not sure that I think it's great for either for playwrights or for actors to work where they can work and where they can work with the greatest amount of freedom, regardless of whether they can make as much money out there. On the other hand, there is, I think, in the American theater at the moment, a kind of pallor, I should say, about the work that is being done around the country. That time after time we go out to see some of these plays, and they don't seem to be very daring plays. They all seem to be rather mild efforts to write almost apologetic efforts. And I wonder if just the regional theaters need to get new plays from playwrights who have received grants doesn't sometimes result in more tepid plays than those that are produced by playwrights who are trying to write a play that is going to either excite a commercial theater to the point of them wanting to pay a lot of money to go to see it, or failing that, some kind of artistic theater like the National, where you're going to go and have top performers, and you're going to compete. In a certain sense, the National Theater plays are treated with the same severity as the West End, so that it isn't an easy thing to go to the National.
Oh no, it's not a haven for anybody. Quite the reverse.
No, what Peter was saying about moving gradually into a less naturalistic and rather non-representational theater. What I find most depressing about the theater, not only Broadway, but off-Broadway and off-Broadway, is that so many playwrights start out writing really drafts of something that are meant that could be done on television or film. And so few playwrights go to the theater to want to write for the theater, for the very particular qualities or benefits that the theater offers.
Oh, yes, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Well, I went to see the closing performance of the 3 one-acts at Lincoln Center, sort of going to see what the opposition was up to. And there were 3, I thought, really very well-written plays, and actually the best-written play by Percy Granger, I think called Vivian, could it really have been a script for Visions on television. It was a very high-class, beautifully written thing, but it had no more place in the theater than anything else. I mean, it really would have been better as a television, classy television show. So would have the first play. Unfortunately, the most interesting play was also the one that was least developed, but it's also by one of our great playwrights, John Ware. In Fireworks Lie Secret Codes. That was the only real theater piece in that entire evening. And I felt sort of outraged by that Lincoln Center should be sponsoring scripts which really could have gone on television without any changes.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I was thinking about anger, and I don't really, I was fishing about trying to do my best, thinking of getting myself angry about that. Dissatisfaction, however, lies more with playwrights, in my view, than anything else. Because it seems to me that I'm always reading. I read an awful lot of people's plays, and they come to me, how do I get started, or will you read this, will you read that? And I do try. It's boring a lot of the time, because when you spend a lot of time of your day getting on with your own stuff and being alone with a piece of paper, the last thing you want to do at night is sit down and read a lot of other people's scripts. And not because, of jealousy or neurosis, but just the tedium of opening yet another piece of paper when I'd much rather, I don't know, get drunk or anything else. But the thing I find over and over again, Mr. Canby is absolutely right, is a refusal to be theatrical. Everything is everything else. A novel can be a television play, can be a script, can be a film, can be a whatever. All that's untrue. A theatre experience is only that. It is something created to be done live every night and different every night on X number of boards nailed together. And that is really all it is. I mean, it does seem to me so extraordinary that people refuse to try and exercise the imaginative muscle of the audience they have asked to watch. They are invoking all sorts of other media, or none. They prefer to have one set and 2 people whining at each other about my mom did that and my dad did that, and expect people to be receiving an experience that is theatrical. They are not. Half the plays I see could be done on radio with a few little visuals added. Or not half, that's too excessive, but it's wrong. You're absolutely right, Mr. Canby, absolutely right. One has to...
Well, speaking of theatricality, Amadeus is certainly an exercise in what you can do with theatrical device, and it always disturbs me that people come up to me and they say, but Mozart really wasn't like that.
Yes. As if they knew. Or as if they but that I mean, I must warn any playwrights listening that if you are theatrical, I've always tried to be theatrical in that sense, from Royal Hunt onwards, and certainly with Equus. I mean, I always want to create structures whose final statements, not messages, I hate that word, but statements are in fact gestural as well as verbal, and can only be done in that place at that time, nowhere else. If they can, then take them off and do them somewhere else in another medium. But I warn you, you will be accused of being, and I repeat, accused of being theatrical. People come out and say, oh, this work's very good, but it's a bit theatrical. It's theatrical, you know. I mean, no painter is ever accused of being painterly. Some curious built-in condescension about all that, and it's very, as if it's a bit superficial, if it is in fact thrilling the eye, the ear, and the spirit, the psyche, and the mind at the same time, which is, of course, the ultimate duty of it. That's what it's there for.
But does an audience have a right to demand of you that you have an authentic description of, or authentic characterization of Mozart, even though perhaps you have found one that suits your theatrical scheme?
No, I did not find one that suited my theatrical scheme. My theatrical scheme came out of my imagination that was an authentic portrait of Mozart. But you see, I could hide since we seem to be suddenly talking about Amadeus, I could hide behind the cop-out that this is not my Mozart, it's Salieri's Mozart, that is the description by a malicious old man of events. Right. And I could get away with that, but I won't, because I in fact believe that more or less is Mozart to me. I mean, that's what it was. The fact that the work had no relation whatever to what we call the life seems to me the fascinating point about the whole story. That it's a very ordinary man, in some ways, rather childlike, with a great love of life, a kind of earthiness, a kind of extreme silliness, a slight retarded quality, and the other side of it was someone who happened to write the Jupiter Symphony. But if you didn't know that fact, you would be greatly surprised to learn it, having met him. That seems to be the mystery of the story.
Did you know that you have inspired a program at Carnegie Hall?
Oh, yes, I have. Salieri's Masses to be played on.
Yes.
Exactly.
And on the same program, Mozart's.
Yes, yes, I've seen this. Yeah.
And it says the rivalry still goes on.
I don't think it does much, actually.
I mean there at Carnegie Hall.
I think in a moment we might go to questions. Meanwhile...
I want to know where you find a people or a place that will make you responsible to do the things that you've said and not accept less in the theater?
That's a very good question, and I don't know, because it is a dedication, and it can only be that. It's got to be. It's not a dilettante thing, and it's certainly not a career in that way. It has to be a compulsion, or it's not worth doing. I think it has to be a fever. And like all fevers, they cannot be indulged. It has to be a submission to a continuous and relentless discipline. I mean, I always get very cross when I get these scripts which I read and have no sense of form and a kind of contempt for form in the author himself.
And an indulgence.
And that is indulgence to me. I now get very cross because
why I use the word
they write it back. So if you write, I've been invited to comment, so I do write a letter back saying this displays no sense of form at all. You're not honouring your own material. You are free until you make the first mark. Then you are no longer free. You have to that degree, submit to the mark you yourself have made on the canvas, on the page, in your mind. And you then have to submit to it. And if you was going to write to me saying, I'm not interested in submissions of that kind, then don't be an artist of any kind, because artist is finally about the submissions you elect for yourself.
How
Must
wonderful
be.
that you take that responsibility.
Yes, it's a grown-up job, in fact.
It is.
It's not for children.
It is.
Jean, do you want to...
Peter Edward McCabe. A question to Mr. Shaffer.
Shaffer, isn't it?
Shaffer. Mr. Shaffer. With reference to the recent production of Ibsen's The Wild Duck here on Broadway, do you think that modern playwrights should, or indeed have a right, to rewrite original scripts to make the language more, let's say, relevant to the present day? Or do you think it's something akin to the 18th century's attempt to rewrite the Bard?
Nobody has a right to rewrite anybody else's work. But he's not doing so. He's doing his own as soon as he starts doing that. Do you mean rewrite, or do you mean simply make a contemporary viability for something?
Well, I think the playwright actually changed the language.
But in the case of Ibsen, it's in Norwegian anyway.
Yes.
I mean, No, but, you know, were the original translators that faithful? We do not know. I don't speak Norwegian. I know that I get offended when a very obvious set of modern contemporary slang expressions are used simply because this does not seem to me to be serving either Ibsen or his adapter or the modern audience. Sensibilities do change in time. History changes. We all change. Generations change. Apprehensions and insights change. It is the duty of a modern audience to get their insights and not to trundle the play about and adapt it and make it that accessible. Accessibility is a meager little virtue, you know. It should not be pandered too much.
Well, when the National Theatre did those two plays, what was it, the Misanthrope and also the Racine play.
Tony Harrison, yes.
And Tony Harrison.
And my dear friend John Dexter directed both of them.
And some of the dialogue was rather zippy for the centuries that they were occurring.
They were zippy, and I mean I'm very well aware of this because I do it myself. In Amadeus, I deliberately use, and it's caused a lot of trouble, use the word wop. First of all, it's deliberately insulting and all that because I think Mozart was very insulting about Italians. Second of all, it's a word that he would not have known because it's a clearly late 19th century word. It means without papers, I think. And the anachronism I put in quite deliberately and can be blamed for it. I'm now rather ashamed of it, actually. I think I could have found a cleverer way of doing it. I don't think it's a right choice in my own work at all. I think it's probably too contemporary. It was done on purpose to show the kind of, to deliberately irritate a modern audience and so that they could share the irritation of the people at the court around about it. Now I'm not so sure it's right. It's a very moot point. But if it means that you take a classical text and put deliberate neologisms all over it, I think ultimately what you end up with is a rather weakened, object. If you treat Racine finally like that, I think is to remove the marmoreal and classical taste of Racine, which is about you coming to it, not the other way around. It's a delicate balance, of course, that has to be found.
I think that possibly there's not an absolute rule. It's something you have to sense.
You have to sense. Yeah. That's right. Yes, it can be fine or it can be vulgar.
But Henry, excuse me, that Misanthrope was done with Tanya Maseyevich's set, and it was done very modern, right?
Yes, it was.
So that the whole thing was unified in terms of the text, the poetic text.
Yes, it was put into de Gaulle's front and left everybody saying highly elaborate things that they would not possibly have said under de Gaulle's front.
And I thought they used it quite well.
My name is Granville Burgess. This is to Miss Kroll and then rather arbitrarily to Joanna Glass, but someone else may have something to say, and I think we may have heard Mr. Shaffer's opinions on this, but it addresses the question of whether, when do you know a play is Broadway material or off-Broadway material? When you shop a play around, you often hear, well, it's not big enough for Broadway, it's not theatrical enough, doesn't have enough scope, and I guess the question is, can a good story that is somewhat gripping story with good characters and maybe just, maybe the, quote, old-fashioned kind of play, unquote, but a domestic drama, is that still possible or is that not big enough for Broadway now? Are we past, I don't know, Eugene O'Neill days or whatever? Thank you.
Gee, I don't know how to answer that. Really don't.
Is there
any way of knowing? Are there any parameters at all?
Well, it's very crass, but usually the first thing that one hears, I think, upon submission of a manuscript is star talk. And that seems to be the bottom line. There are a lot of ensemble plays that just can't be considered because there's not a name to draw. Would you agree?
But given a name?
Well, I think the problem there, to do a straight play now with a modest amount of people on maybe one set is $500,000. So that the judgment there is the economics, the backers, and where is the audience? Is it for a carriage trade? Will it attract a star? So that the least consideration is the work itself, I think.
But in the case of your play, you had Eva Le Gallienne, who is one of the most distinguished actresses in the American theater, and yet she isn't a name for the people who watch television. So that you had a marvelous actress and a marvelous performance, but I don't think that the name Eva Le Gallienne would have rescued you the same way that, let's say, who's the lady who plays in All in the Family? Jean Stapleton.
Clearly, yes. Yes, we had Gilda Radner down the street from us on 47th, pulling them in. A very, very large audience of apparently 15 to 25-year-olds with $30 a ticket or something.
Play about middle-aged adultery.
Yes.
What is middle-aged?
Younger than us.
Yes.
I'm C.A.R. Smith. This is for Mr. Shaffer. I am a working actor in New York, but did not work for Mr. Dexter. I almost got there. He seemed like such a gent. I really regret him only of the ones who've turned me down for acting jobs. Can you tell us, since he worked with you on Royal Hunt, and you were saying later that he was a friend of yours, some of your feelings with him and dealings with him?
Well, yes, very briefly, because we were talking about playwriting, really, it's a little difficult.
Well, you
playwriting Dexter's a very great director. I mean, he's one of the very few directors who deal exactly in the director's world what I was saying a playwright should do in his world. He's a totally theatrical director. He has an enormous contemporary sensibility. Witness the fact that he is the first director at the Metropolitan Opera. I know a lot of people talk against him and say, well, he's this and that. He is on the record of having done the Billy Budd, the Carmelites, Lulu, and Parade. I think it is the most distinguished directorial record that New York Opera has ever had. In fact, this is my thing of contemporary opera, not 19th century opera, which is another matter. The wonder of John, in a nutshell, is that he can do that he understands the contemporary sensibility, and yet is totally interested in the great antique theatres, the Japanese, kabuki, the theatre of gesture, the Greek, the Elizabethan, all of which he has studied all his life and understands immensely and intensely, and can help a playwright to fulfill and vivify his vision through those disciplines. I think that's all one can expect of a director. He does two things. He makes enormous journeys, and again, he submits himself to the process of acquiring the technique whereby he can fulfill those visions, and yours. I mean, he doesn't write his name like a signature across your work. He serves it and believes that that's what all directors should do. You, because of this exquisite emotional blackmail, find yourself, no, right, that's wrong of it, it's not blackmail, because of this exquisite emotional pressure of his intensity, find yourself serving him. I mean, you then get into a relationship where you are, in fact, at one over something, which is wonderful.
Thank you very much.
My name is Jay Barney, and my question is directed to Vincent Canby, but I welcome input from others. Professional actors work for free for 4 or 5 weeks to put your play on the boards. In return for that, they ask through their union that they either be given those parts when it goes to a better contract or be bought out. Do you find this lien an impediment or a burden for future productions?
Well, I haven't been faced with that problem, unfortunately. I do think that the actors who, every theater I've worked with, they do get paid. They get paid minimal amounts of money, especially considering the tremendous amount of work they do. My 3 one-acts at the Manhattan Theater Club it's a 2-character evening, and Lois Smith and George Guidall, who are absolutely first-rate actors who make work in all media, worked for $130 a week, about 10 hours a day, and that I find so moving and so exciting that I would support them in any way I can. I think that the contracted equity has asked writers, I don't know if it's a contract exactly, maybe somebody else knows the problem we're facing right now, is that the writer guarantee, I think, a month's salary or several weeks' salary to those actors who, in the off-Broadway production, who are not taken if the show goes to off-Broadway or Broadway. Well, most writers I know, including myself, can hardly afford to take taxi cabs, much less I'm in no position to be able to guarantee anybody's salary. I think, though, that they certainly should be given preference in any kind of a move of that sort. I certainly would. I wouldn't end up. The nice thing about the theater, too, is the writer is very much a part of any production. In fact, I think it's in the contract, isn't it, that we can fire directors if we don't like them. But the writer would not have allowed those performers to come in to start with if he didn't believe in them. So I do believe we have a great responsibility to them.
To clarify that, the playwright is not responsible. All he has to do is convey notice to the future producer that the future responsible.
Is that
You don't find that an impediment or a burden or a reason why it would not go to Broadway or off-Broadway?
No, I certainly wouldn't.
Thank you.
We've had playwrights on the panel here, and I know David Mamet told me that he had the actors sent him a bill for $2,500 for some show that he had tried out in workshop, and the bill came to him as a playwright. And this is I don't know why it can't be handed on to the producer. In other words, if a play is done at the Yale Repertory Theater after it's been done in a workshop production, the Yale Repertory Theater should pay the bill.
The playwright is not responsible.
You're sure?
I didn't know that. I didn't know.
Okay. Lucy, is that correct?
He is not responsible, but if he signs that agreement, and then I have had many times not been able to place the play because the person taking it on at another theater does not want to absorb those costs, because everybody's working on a small budget. And so that sometimes it does interfere with the transfer.
Becomes an obstacle to future
Yes, because the
production.
playwright has to pass it on to the producer, and the producer will refuse.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Byrne. And I guess I want to address my question to Joanna or to Charles. And thank you all for your information. You, Mr. Shaffer, for your comment about submissions was quite helpful. I just finished my second play, and I received an offer to produce it. It's only a one-act, though. And my major, I've been given a major suggestion to expand it to a full length. Now, my conflict is, does having it produced as a one-act first diminish its chances in expanded form? And, I have a conflict in wanting to see it produced, but I don't know whether I should really give up that need right now and continue writing. And I have a small other question is, have you ever considered directing your own work?
Who are you addressing?
Either one of us?
Yes.
Well, I would agree with what Mr. Canby said originally, that I think a good one act should just stay a one act. And now with so many people around, especially I think when I come into the city, I feel it, that there are so many people gobbling up material and needing material with cable and so on. There's practically nothing that you can write that several people aren't going to say to you, this should be something else. And you just have to stick to your guns and go with it as a one act.
After Edward Albee had Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, he proceeded to write 3 or 4 one-act plays like Death of Bessie Smith and American Dream.
Right.
And I said to him, Edward, when are you going to write another full-length play? He drew himself up and he said, all my plays are full-length.
Good for you.
And about you directing your own work?
I would never direct. I have no interest in it. Really.
I would never either. I don't have the patience with people.
I directed a one act of my own, and that was it was a brand new play. It was done at just the Ensemble Studio Theater Marathon, where they do new plays, a one act marathon, and I loved it. I worked with the actors. It was a completely different experience, and it was actresses. And what was interesting is when something didn't work, I could see why it didn't work. Instead of feeling very defensive and being told that it didn't work, I would say, oh, well, how about let's rewrite it? And a lot of times I would adjust things right on the spot and experiment with them. And I found it, I don't know that I would do a huge production of a full-length play, but I think it's very valuable as a writer to try to work with actors and to do that once in a while.
Peter found the secret of one-act plays. If you do one one-act play, you do another one with it and make a program, and you try. And in your case, the plays had relationship to each other.
In both cases, yes, actually. The private and public, and then of course with White Lies and Black Comedy.
Did you start out writing just the one play?
Yes, I wrote the one play.
And then you said you had to have another to go with
well,
it.
I thought this is useless. It's an hour and 5 minutes. And, I love only the theatre. I didn't want it on television. I better find, Yes, I quite deliberately found another thing for 3 actors, the same 3 actors, to echo it. Yes.
My name is James Nicola. I have a question for Peter Shaffer and also Lucy, but everyone is welcome to respond to it. Among other things I'm doing an off and off Broadway, I read scripts for the Manhattan Theatre Club, and many of them are really bad. But even though many that are really bad have all the ingredients of a play but just need work putting together. So it's one thing I've learned since I've been in New York is that it is the lousy playwright of today that is going to become the masterpiece writer or whatever of tomorrow. Now I ask, with the reduced funding of the arts, which is inevitable whether the Republican Party stays in power or not, the emphasis, we are told, will fall on the states as opposed to the federal government, but it's also going to have to fall on, that's my question, you as a successful playwright, and you as someone who is objective, should the successful playwright, should not only the corporate world be responsible for supporting the arts more, but should the successful playwright be obliged, morally or artistically or however, to help those struggling early playwrights or in any way?
You mean financially? You do. You can't morally oblige anybody. You cannot emotionally.
No, I mean, I mean, should they?
That's right.
Should they be morally or
no, someone is either morally obliged by himself or he's not. You cannot be morally obliged by himself.
Obliged to financially support. You can be morally
you mean obliged to support?
He's talking about that private sector.
I'd like to answer that, Peter,
Please
if
do.
I may. That I think you have an obligation, the young playwright has an obligation. I'm going to turn it back to you. Do you have an obligation to work for a national theatre or a state theatre? That I think to be terribly active, to create the arena for you to be able to be produced. I also think that that stage readings, you say you sit and you read plays. I think that the playwright, coming back to Susan's, that if you take a group of friends or actors and read your play, you'll learn a great deal before you impose it upon somebody else, you see. Now, I think that your question is an imposition. He is not a foundation, Peter. And he can give his money to whatever foundations he wants to, but it is not his responsibility, and I'm sure he serves a young playwright by going to see his plays and his reading of your plays. But I'm talking of, I'm addressing your question to the benefit of the young playwright, that it behooves you to create a national theatre and not to depend on the foundations to...
I should point out, as a slight indiscreet piece of autobiography, that a very large percentage of my income goes straight back to the National Theatre. 10% of all my Broadway earnings go straight to the National Theatre.
Which is that?
Which is, I think, in that sense, foundation enough.
But maybe I should then just right. That's true. That's fine. Yeah. So the system is set up indeed that where you get that's fine.
And quite right, because then you know that money can then do exactly that work. And I have the slight guarantee it's being done responsibly by people by the company I have already endorsed by giving them my work.
And by the same token, the regional theatres, after they do your play, request a tithe, and so the money goes back to the non-profit.
The tragic thing I want to call your attention to, and this should have been, I guess, the focus of the question, is that since September, 24 of the somewhat around 200 off-Broadway theatres have closed. And what can we do to stop that? That's what I should have probably said. And the regional theatres are closing, and they're running out of budgets and canceling seasons. What can we do? The government isn't going to help. The private sector will never really fill in the responsibility there.
Well, I think we've got to pressure the private sector to fill in. I think that's the important thing.
I'm sure that if Peter had one of his plays started at La Mama, he would be giving a percentage of the profits back to La Mama.
Exactly.
And if they were in trouble, he probably would help them out of gratitude. But you can't ask him to support playwriting in general because
it's far too vague and one might not wish to. I mean,
but I think the National Theatre is a very good example of how that works by getting support from the professional and successful playwrights and
oh yes,
indeed. And may I say, I just always wonder why that question is never asked of Neil Simon.
Well,
he'll give you a one-line answer.
Also, you must remember that if you do, as I said before, it's rather self-justifying, but I will say it again, if you actually elect to spend most of your life in a non-commercial situation, as I have done for 10 or 15 years, you get played about 5 times a month. No one can really say that one is very rich on 5 times a month. Broadway, when I'm lucky enough to have successes on Broadway, it compensates me for that. That's lovely. But my working life as an Englishman is 5 times a month. 6 times a month. That's not exactly the most successful thing in the world. I could do it in the West End. I won't. I prefer to do it there.
My name is David Walter, and my question is for Mr. Shaffer. I know you have a background in music, which of course makes itself known in your plays such as Amadeus and The Privateer. I was wondering if you felt there was any kind of a relationship between the writing of non-musical theater and music itself in terms of structure and thematic development and form.
Oh, of course there is, in the sense that all work, the preoccupation of all work must be formal once the initial commitment has been made to do it at all. Of course.
It as structured? Do you see it as structured as a...
I don't mean that you sit and brood and say, I want to do that shaped thing, what will fit into that. Of course not. But it happens simultaneously, doesn't it? The idea begins to sprout, and because you are working on it and you train yourself to work on it, you can't go in that direction because it starts escaping, and therefore that can't be right. You can't go in that direction because it's becoming unclear or diffuse or taking over in another form. Gradually, the form and the content have to work themselves out together, and it's a semi-conscious process. It's very difficult to discuss it because you know when you're doing it right. When you're doing it wrong, you feel that you're bumping up against invisible walls all the time. It's not working. And what that process is, you put together afterwards in your head, and what it was working out the appropriate form for that.
You don't know until you've done it.
No, not ideal. I mean, you semi-know. You know when you're getting it right. You also know when you're getting it wrong, actually, because it's distressing. And then you get what are called writer's blocks, or you get 100 different uncomfortable moments. But it has, in order to be what we call organic, or seemingly organic, it has to be a simultaneous process, the content and the form. But it is an absolute and necessary preoccupation. Everything has to be organized. A canvas has to be organized by a painter, a building by an architect. It's not specifically musical, but you can, if you like, call it musical in a way, and just as a rondo is a repeating form, so you can have a verbal rondo, yes, or a dramatic one.
It's killing me.
Hello, my name is Helen Goditis, and I have a question for Mr. Shaffer and for the other playwrights here as well. This is really more of a sociological problem, I suppose, because political analysts have looked at our society and the world in general and have seen that there is a degree of confusion, and a sense of distraught, and perhaps even a sense of despair. How do you view the job of the theater at this particular and very crucial moment in history?
It has hundreds of jobs, from making you laugh to illuminating your experience, to adding a little to your stature as an imaginative being, of passing your time pleasantly, of giving you a sympathy you didn't have before, of making you see the color green in a new way because a set designer has done it properly. Hundreds of jobs, not all of them, nor nearly all of them didactic, in fact almost none of them nakedly didactic. Hundreds of jobs simultaneously, like all art.
The plays are set out to be didactic usually don't accomplish their objective.
Least of all, I would say. Least of all. You can't go in front of the public saying, I want to say this. If you can run along beside your play saying, what I meant to say was, then you will fail.
It also, it does seem to me that when, I don't know if this is true today as much as it was maybe 15 years ago, but theater critics, it seemed to me as a reader of theater reviews, used to use the word pessimism in a sort of negative sense. Poor Tennessee Williams was always accused of writing pessimistic plays. And I still think that's one of the most idiotic criticisms that can be leveled at any first-class artist, whatever he's doing. Because I don't think any artist, whatever he's doing, can be, in effect, pessimistic if he cares enough to be an artist. The very act of creating something is something quite great, and I wouldn't want to classify that as either optimistic or pessimistic. But to get to your question, it seems to me that the the artist has no, the playwright has no particular function to buck up society and tell society that everything's great. But I think any playwright who's any good automatically is saying a great deal about the world in which we're living and sharing.
But to offer insight also?
Well, he does, but if he's good, he's doing that. And he does all the things that Peter said.
And to celebrate the act of being alive, that's what
Which
living art must
writing
do.
is.
Yes, which writing does.
What about Brecht? I mean, here he would go along, and then he would show you an action, and then he would have somebody come out and say, change the world, not yourselves. And so that you had a playwright who did write very well in his
Yes, indeed.
but sometimes the things that they came out and said didn't match what the audience was feeling. I know I saw the Caucasian Chalk Circle in Berlin, and at the end of the play, the people were in tears and getting all the wrong message from it. And poor Brecht didn't know what to do because he couldn't. The play was defeating his own message.
History sometimes does have a kind of dissenting view on what artists think they're doing. I mean, for example, in Mother Courage, indeed, that silent scream in Mother Courage is what most people remember from Helena Weigel's performance, not the alienating effects that Brecht had originally intended for it. It's the least alienated effect is that scream, actually. But I find Brecht difficult for that reason. I do not like being told what I'm going to see and then seeing it. I mean, I like the actual process of discovering. Ken Tynan said to me once, the critic, said to me once, I believe that people do not finally come to the theatre for entertainment, to pass the time, because they're tired businessmen, whatever, all the list of things you always hear, why do people go to the theatre? They go for a variety from a variety of corners, but to be surprised. And I think actually it's a portmanteau word that's quite good, because, you know, they didn't know what they were going to see when they came in. They think they do. But if they discover something else, they're already ahead. I mean, already.
It's the essence of discovery.
I think, yes. Yeah. Surprise, not just discovery. You can discover things in a languid way. I mean, a real surprise, astonishment. Astonishment is one of the most valued human emotions, particularly as the world seems to be getting more and more gummed in a kind of resignation about everything, from art to assassination.
Thank you.
But may I just say something? Something that doesn't seem to tie into that would be what one hears around New York so much, that that the power of the New York Times critic lies in his ability to tell people whether or not they should try their $25 or $30 on this thing. That seems to be the opposite of the surprise element. The people want to know pretty much what they're going to get for their money.
But it's no part of the poor playwright's responsibility to account for the critic of the New York Times.
Oh, no, but it is an element. I think it's an element in what's happening in the theatre.
No, it is what has happened is, in fact, a conformity of a kind, a conformity allegedly of nonconformists. It's a conformity of people who want, in fact, largely societies get what they want, I think. People get what they want. If they want a Delphic oracle, they've certainly got one. If you are going to, in fact, base the expectation, the life, the viability of a large artistic enterprise on 2 columns of newsprint, no matter who writes it and where it is placed, you've got an oracular situation. It is by itself an absurdity.
Well, most good critics don't.
No, I'm not saying they do, but you can't nail the playwright to that. His job is still to surprise, assuming that no one has seen it. He can't help it if somebody else gives it all away, if that's what you're saying, or is diffusing that surprise. I don't think good critics do that anyway. I think they communicate their own surprise and pleasure in discovering new things. I think good critics do.
Well, sure.
I think Amadeus is full of surprises. And I was terrifically surprised when suddenly the old man... Well, he was. It starts with an old man. And suddenly he throws off his clothes, and there he is.
Now you spoil it.
Well, you're only a few.
Right, okay. One last question.
I'm George E. Wolfe, and I have a question for Mr. Shaffer. Will you please tell us the reference material upon which you based your concept of Mozart's personality, other than the letters to his sister, which would indicate his public behavior?
I've never read his letters to his sister, surprisingly enough. I've read his letters to his cousin, which are far more scatological. I presume that you meant they're scatological. Have you read his letters to his sister, by the way?
I have not.
No. They're very difficult to find. I've read all his letters, actually. They're in 3 enormous volumes by, translated by, oh God, I can't remember her name now, Harrison, I think it is. Published in 1933. They're very good. Well, there are many, many, many sources. I mean, if you read, I think the best Life of Mozart is a very early one by Otto Jahn, Jahn. It's a very fine book, I think. I don't like Einstein. I think he was much overrated. I haven't read Hildesheimer, incidentally, who's written this massive book in German, which has just come out, which draws a far more scabrous portrait of Mozart. I suspect it's rather hysterical. I haven't read it. There are many memoirs. Da Ponte, who wrote the libretto for 3 of Mozart's operas, wrote his own memoirs. Kelly, who starred, as it were, as the tenor in the first performance of Figaro, wrote his memoirs. I read all the court records of the time, of the Habsburg court. Oh, it's endless. I mean, I spent a year in archives and in libraries. It's rather boring to go through the list, actually, but those are just a few of them.
Thank you very much.
I apologize for spoiling your surprise, but I really took it for granted that you had all seen the play.
Well, there are other surprises.
There are at least a dozen more, maybe more than that.
I'd like to break in here and say that we were indeed honored to have the mayor of New York City at this second series of Working in the Theater. They are taking place at City University, the Graduate Center of City University of New York. And these seminars, which are offered by the wing each fall in the spring and summer, in the fall and spring, are designed to give those attending an insight into the skills and problems of all areas of the theater. The series, as you know, is open to students of professional training schools, colleges or university, and members of the theatrical unions and Broadway and off-Broadway theater companies. The American Theater Wing, I'd like to just go back a little bit, is the oldest service organization of the Broadway theater. It was founded in 1917, and in 1947 it founded the American Theater Wing's Tony Awards. This event, as you know, is videotaped and it will be seen nationally on television on June 7th, I believe. The Wing is a nonprofit organization. It sponsors performances in hospitals and prisons, as well as these theater seminars. We bring casts of Broadway and off-Broadway shows to schools and to institutions, as well as these seminars. I can't tell you how grateful I am, not only to the prestige of the American Theater Wing that brings these people to our seminars and to the audiences that come to hear them. I'm Isabel Stevenson. I'm president of the American Theater Wing, and I am very grateful to all the people that have helped make them possible. Bill Riley, our program director, and his staff of volunteers, which do wonderful work, and we need more and more of them at the office. To Bob Isaacs, who is director of Cumbin, and his staff of cameraman and crew. And I thank you very much. Thank all of you for being here. I thank Henry Hughes and Jean Dalrymple for co-moderating so very well with their background of experience to bring out everything that they possibly can in this very short time. Tomorrow we will have our seminar on the production. And we have the 5th of July, the entire producing team. And that is really from option to opening. What goes on to doing a Broadway show, bringing it from off-Broadway onto Broadway. It might not be as glamorous as some that we've had, but it is very, very important for every student of the theater. Thank you very much for being here.